Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tulsa Community College. My name is Bill McCamey, and I serve as the chairman of the board of regents for Tulsa Community College. It is my great pleasure this evening to introduce Senator and Dr. Tom Coburn on this, his final town hall of his very illustrious career. Speaking for Tulsa Community College, we regret Oklahoma is losing this dedicated public servant, but we are very pleased that he has chosen to be here tonight at our Performing Arts Center for Education in his final remarks. By way of introduction, I'll tell you that Dr. Tom A. Coburn, MD, was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1994, and its voters then encouraged him and voted for him as U.S. Senator beginning in November of 2004. This is the culmination of really 20 years of public service. During that time, he has focused on wasteful spending, protecting liberty, balancing the budget, improving health care access and affordability, protecting the sanctity of all human life, including the unborn, and representing Oklahoma values and viewpoints. Your attendance tonight certainly demonstrates that. He's a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Dr. Coburn also serves as ranking member of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committees. As a senator, Dr. Coburn has offered more amendments than any other of his colleagues, working tirelessly to save the taxpayer billions of dollars. Dr. Coburn also is a 3-time cancer survivor. Dr. Coburn and his wife Carolyn, a graduate of Oklahoma State University, were married in 1998. They have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. I'm also pleased to share with you that Senator Coburn's very talented daughter, Sarah Coburn, has performed several times in this hall and is on this very stage. She is regarded as one of the divas in music today. I am sure the senator takes great pride in her success, and hopefully we will get a chance to see her here sometime in the future. As a matter of fact, if the senator wanted to sing a few bars with us, we'd be happy to let him do that. I'm not sure where she got her talent, but we'll let the senator tell us that. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Tom Coburn.
Please have a seat. Have a seat. Thank you very much. Have a seat. Dr. McCamey, thank you, and thank Tulsa Community College for hosting us again here. What a great facility, and great that we have this in one of our communities in Oklahoma. The whole purpose of tonight, we're going to have microphones out so that you can ask questions. Purpose of a town hall is not to hear me go on and on, but really rather to hear what your input is and your criticisms and your thoughts are. One of the things that happens after I do town halls in Oklahoma is I really get pumped back up again based on the values, the character, and the work ethic of Oklahomans. And so it's really helpful to me as I kind of climb those hills, push boulders up ice floes in Washington, to know what's here and what Oklahomans want and what they expect. It's just a lot easier to take the criticisms that go along with that when you have a backing of a large group of people. So I want to thank you for that. I'd mention a couple other things. My wife and a couple of my daughters and grandchildren and sons-in-laws are here. The music talent, I assure you, Doctor, did not come from me. I have none. If you ever sit next to me in church, you will affirm that. The other point I would make, I think we've been pretty successful in raising the Americans' awareness of what isn't right in Washington in terms of lack of transparency, lack of efficiency, lack of accountability. And that only has happened because I've had wonderful, wonderful staff. First of all, if you go to work for me, you're promised not to get a lobbying job anywhere in the country. That's the first thing that'll happen to you. The second thing is the characteristics of Oklahoma are manifested in how our staff works on the Hill, in terms of treating people with kindness, listening, being cooperative, but standing firm on the principles that we know to be true that establish this country and preserves its liberty. So my hat's off to the Oklahomans and the other staff that have served this office for the last 10 years. They have helped us accomplish what we're doing. I would tell you, and I've said this before, America, I think, is very anxious right now, worried. If you look at poll numbers, the lack of confidence in the government, it's probably at the lowest level it's been in a long time. And there's a good reason for it, is because we don't see great leadership out of the government. Leadership that calls us together rather than leadership that divides us. Leadership that accentuates different points of view at the expense of other points of view, calling one wrong and one right. The fact is the real issues before our country are the problems in front of us, and how we solve those problems is what we ought to be debating, not debating whether or not those problems are real. They're real. Whether it's from the Middle East and the threat of ISIS, whether it's financially, whether it's the upcoming underfunding and bankruptcy of Medicare and Social Security, and even sooner next year of the Social Security disability system. Those are real problems. And they can be solved, but they're not going to be solved until we have the leadership, both in terms of principle and style, that's going to try to bring people together. You know, one of the things I think about a lot is we don't see a lot of hope coming from Washington, and in the consequence of not fixing the problems that will flow out of that, it doesn't matter what your political viewpoint is, you're going to be impacted the same. We're all Americans. And what we need is principled, courageous, character and moral-centered leadership at every key position in our government. And we don't have that. And we're the ones that have to change that. So you're not part of the problem. You're actually here to try to participate. So what I'll do is stop with that. My wife is here. Wherever she is, I'm going to have her stand. Oh, right there. Okay. She refuses to stand. So if the staff will get the mics, and whoever wants to start this off, they get a raise their hand. We hold on to the microphones because we've learned that if we give you the microphone, we may not get it back. So we got one right over here, Jerry.
First of all, I want to thank you for holding the town hall meeting and being of any constituent in the state. I certainly get yours back first, always. The question I've got is, when and if another 9/11 occurs in the country, is the federal government going to go back towards American values or more toward fascism and trying to put more control down on the population?
That's a great question. First of all, I think there will be another 9/11 at some point in the future. If you think about the multitude of people who hate the principles that this country stands for and see us in a light as something other than thinking about goodwill towards other people, and just the mass numbers, is the likelihood is that someday they're going to be successful. And I can't tell you all that I know. I've sat on the Intelligence Committee for 4 years. I will tell you what you have read in the press is not accurate about the NSA. I know that personally and specifically. Most of what Edward Snowden has revealed is not accurate. Your emails are not read. Your phone conversations are not tapped. And if they are, a separate federal judge has made a decision that there is show cause for that, just like in any other investigation. So a lot of what you hear and a lot of what people are saying, I don't want to give up my liberty to be safe, has been exaggerated outside of the realm. I take the exact opposite view of Mark Udall from Colorado. I believe we have done a phenomenal job with no threat to your liberty in keeping this country safe the last 10 years. That's what I believe. And I've actually been at NSA multiple times. I have staff out there about every 2 weeks. I've been in forward operating positions with the CIA. These people will never get recognized in their whole life, and they give their lives away every day. You'll never know about it. They're the silent Americans that do the hard grunt work to keep us safe. And what we're seeing is a retraction because we don't have the trust that we're going to do it right. That's what, it all comes back, is if our confidence level was the government wasn't going to abuse our liberties, then our worry about some of these things wouldn't be as great. And you wouldn't see the inflammatory statements about them. I can tell you personally on the 2 programs, I have looked at all the data on the 2 programs that monitor telephone calls. There has never been a time when a terrorist calling into this country to talk to an American that any of the data associated with that has been looked at without a federal judge saying, this looks suspicious to me. So it's not what you tend to think it is. There's 2 significant programs, and there's a 3rd one by the executive order. But I find it profound how many times the judges are called to look at something and they say, we just don't think it's a big enough risk. We're not going to let you do it. But you never hear that. I also will tell you, as I think there's probably been 30 significant incidents that what the NSA and the CIA have done and the FBI have done have stopped significant terrorist incidents. And I can't go into details on those because if I go into details on those, then our capabilities on how we do that become exposed. But the fact is I actually trust them. Has the CIA made mistakes? Yes. Have I made mistakes? Yes. Have those mistakes been involved with limiting your liberty? No. No. So what we've heard and the media crunch on that is great. I think what we have to be is strong. I think we have to use Harry Truman's adage, talk quietly, walk quietly, but carry a great big stick. And don't be afraid, as we are today, because we're war weary, to use a stick when we should be using a stick so that we can prevent real major catastrophe for this country. My greatest fear every night is ISIS. Al-Qaeda are kittens compared to ISIS. From the number of children that have been beheaded to the young daughters who've been put in servitude, to the Christians who've been murdered because they won't accept Islam as their faith. I mean, we've never seen, in my lifetime, born in 1948, anything this ugly. And it's growing. Terrorists are flocking from all around the world to join them, including Americans. So it's serious business. We ought to make sure the press is accurate when they report instead of inflammatory. It's easy to write a headline saying your emails are looked at when in fact they're not. And if they are, I guarantee you a U.S. federal judge has granted that privilege on the basis of very clear evidence that you have probable cause to be looked at. Understand your worry, but it goes with the same disease. What we have to have is a restoration of confidence. And one of the ways to do that is limit the size and scope of the federal government, which we've gotten away from. All right, next question.
Dr. Coburn.
Where are you?
Right here. Left.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you for your years of service. You will be greatly missed.
Thank you.
My concern is regarding the border. The president has said that the reason that he can't do anything was because of Congress. However, As I understand, there are, laws on the books that can be reinforced. And my question is there anything that Congress can do to put pressure on the President and the Attorney General to secure our borders?
That's a great question. I've been in the Senate long enough to have been through this song and dance before. The number of Border Patrol is now double what it was in 2006. Double. We have the capability to control the border. I've been down on it. I've ridden a horseback on it. I've flown over it in helicopters. I've ridden in Jeep, and I've walked along the border. What you have to have is an administration. President Bush didn't do this, and President Obama didn't do it. The only way you're going to get the confidence of the American people on immigration and solve our problem with those that are here illegally today is to absolutely and for sure secure the border and make sure that that happens. That is not an impossible job. And let me just give you an example. In Texas, since Governor Perry brought state law enforcement down to apply to that, the number of incursions. Thank you all. You can tell it's the end of the day in the last town hall meeting. The number of incursions have dropped by 56%. So we can actually do something if we choose to. What we have to be careful of is with our speech and our words, everybody in this room, if they had the opportunity and found themselves in a tough place, will want to come here too. So what we've had is a lack of leadership, a lack of effective management, and I can tell you that we were absolutely lied to by the former Secretary of Homeland Security as to the capability on the border. Not once, but multiple times. And we have a very effective secretary now. His name's Jay Johnson. He is doing a wonderful job. He's cleaning a lot of them. You have no idea the mess at Homeland Security. And he is slowly cleaning that up. But it won't happen overnight. But we can control the border. And when we have controlled the border, the American people are a pretty loving, considerate, forgiving group of people. And once we've got the border control, then we'll decide how we handle the rest of it. But any immigration plan that you would plan today without controlling the border will never work. Never work. And so, as a doctor, I don't treat symptoms, I treat disease. When you treat symptoms, people get sicker, not better. And so you go and treat the disease. And the disease is a porous, uncontrolled border, which goes against the whole basis of our Constitution and what the federal government was supposed to be there in the first place, is controlling our borders. So I think it's solvable, but it's going to require leadership. And I think if there's a change in the Senate, you'll get a much better plan, and I think you'll get the border control. And then we look at the humanitarian side of the disruption of families and everything else, and we put people in line. Paige?
Thank you for your service to our state and our country, Senator. My question is, if you were our president, what might be your top priorities, and how would you institute those priorities?
Gosh, you didn't give me any warning on that question. First of all, the if is so big that, let's just say, if I was placed in charge for a day, my priorities, first thing I see is rebuild confidence in the American people and the leadership in this country. And don't use divisiveness. Try to build unity. It is easy to divide people. You and her go fight, rather than say, how do we solve your all's problems, and how do we reconcile rather than alienate? And it's a principle. Government ain't any different in life. If your whole goal is to alienate people, you're going to have a tough time. If your whole goal is to try to stay reconciled with people, things are going to be a whole lot better. And that principle in leadership needs to be applied. So that'd be the first thing I'd try to do, is build confidence. And be honest with the American people about what the problems are. The problems are is the Congress and the President have not put as priority the biggest problems in front of our country. What they've done is put political gaming in front of the country, and that's why we're all so discouraged and have no confidence. Because we recognize, that's like two 5-year-olds going to fight. Did so, did not, did so, did not. I mean, that's what you hear on the news. And so what we ought to have is real leadership that says we're going to come together, we're going to identify together what the biggest problems are. We may not get our way all the way, but we are going to solve these problems. And they are imminently solvable. But they'll never be solved till you start. And if your whole idea is to scratch somebody else's eyes out before you sit down and talk with them, you're never going to solve the problem. You're never going to come to a solution. I would have a totally different foreign policy. The president's job is to lead the country. It's not to follow the country. I understand we're war weary, but do you realize the hundreds of thousands of people are going to die because of our policy in the Middle East right now? Hundreds of thousands, if not more. When America fails to lead in this world, people are going to die. And so what you have to do is explain why we need to lead. And are there downsides? Yes, there are some risks, but look at the potential benefits. So, I guess in a short time, what I would say is, it's about reaching out. It's about trying to solve problems rather than create them, and communicate that to the American people. What you hear on the news about the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, we get along fine. We just don't get along with the majority leader because he's become a czar and a dictator. And he's ruined the Senate. The whole purpose for our founders' creation of the Senate was to force consensus. And he's eliminated the ability to do that. Do you realize in the U.S. Senate, in the last 12 months, before we got into August, there were 20 amendments in the last year offered on the floor of the Senate. I used to offer 20 amendments a week. Me personally, I'm talking 20 amendments total have been allowed to be offered. That says the people of Oklahoma have no voice in the U.S. Senate because they can't have their thought, either Senator Inhofe or myself, thought applied to a bill through an amendment. And so therefore the Senate isn't working. There's 400 plus bills sitting on Harry Reid's desk. 50 of them have to do with economic improvement. They'll never see the light of day because he didn't want his members to take any votes that might be difficult to explain at home. I love explaining difficult votes. That's what you sent me up there for. It wasn't to take a pass. Make a decision, one way or the other, and come home and explain it. And you get to decide whether you think I made the right decision or not. And I can tell you, in my history in the Senate, there's been votes that Oklahomans in general have disagreed with. But I've come home and defended them. And I think I've voted pretty straightforward for Oklahoma values. But you got to have the information plus the decision-making capacity to make those votes. And when there's no opportunity to do that, there's no opportunity for freedom, there's no opportunity for consensus. Where are we?
Dr. Coburn, in the back to your right.
Okay.
Kind of a similar question. If you were in charge of media and communications in this country, how would you fix us so that we are not focused on the superficial, but on wisdom and transmitting that among the people?
Well, first of all, hopefully nobody's ever in charge of media and communications in this country. That's what freedom's all about. Look, I'm sitting at my desk and I watch CNN. The truth is somewhere in between the three. Now, think about it for a minute. There are certain shows on Fox I can't watch because they're totally not fair and totally not balanced. And so what I want is I want all the information to which I can make the best decision. And I read the New York Times every morning at my desk and the Wall Street Journal. So I read those two. One's a conservative newspaper, one's a very liberal newspaper. But I want the viewpoint. The real problem is we've lost the professionalism of journalism. Because even in the Tulsa world, in the stories, often you find opinion instead of reporting. And they never call it opinion. the assumption behind that is you're not smart enough to make up your own mind. And so I consequently, I talked to the local reporters for Tulsa, but I haven't for 8 years talked to a Tulsa World reporter in Washington, because I'm tired of editorial opinion being written into the words of their print.
To the left.
Okay? I'll get her down here in a minute. Rest your arm.
Since you're a physician, and I believe you're opposed to at least major parts of the Affordable Care Act, what do you believe is the best way to deal with the problem of all the uninsured Americans?
Thanks for the question. It's a good one. If you followed the VA story, I just want to remind you that's where we're going with health care in this country. Unaccountable, government-run bureaucracy with no transparency and highly inefficient. The best thing in the world to allocate a scarce resource is what? It's a market. They're not perfect, but markets, free markets, that's what built this country. Free markets, even healthcare, free markets where you get to decide transparently based on price, outcome, and quality, and develop that system. And that doesn't mean you don't create a safety net to take care of those who can't participate in that. But one thing is to say you have to go here, like our Oklahoma Medicaid, versus saying, here's your voucher for your insurance and you'll be treated. You won't have a Medicaid stamp on your forehead. You can go wherever you want. So the fact is markets work. And we haven't had a market, a true market in healthcare, since the advent of large insurance. Now, you can still have a great insurance model, but all of us know that the indemnification, the spread of risk over multiple people, hadn't worked well in health insurance, because what happens to you when you get sick? You get canceled, or you get an unaffordable premium. What happens to you with the Affordable Care Act? You get a deductible that's $6,000 to $8,000 and a premium you can't afford unless you're getting subsidized. And, oh, by the way, your access is not the same access as you had before. So I think we've gone exactly the wrong way. Now, are there some positive consequences of the Affordable Care Act? Yeah. The first quarter of this year, the GDP in terms of health care went down 8.5%. Exactly the wrong way we want to fix health care, because what that meant was preventative care was avoided because people hadn't met deductibles, so they didn't go in. Well, our model's all wrong. We have a disease treatment model instead of a disease prevention model. We ought to incentivize prevention and de-emphasize the treatment part of it to build the part of prevention. So one of the things that's happened is the amount of dollars spent into healthcare actually declined. But it wasn't because people wanted to. It's because they were forced into an insurance program where they no longer could afford the luxury. You know, I just remind you that median family income is at the same level as it was in 19. Your purchasing power, the average Oklahoman's purchasing power is less than what it was in 1988. Our median family income is less. And why is that? It's because we haven't had the growth and have not. Oklahoma's an exception. We're actually on the top end of being better. And thanks to the people of Oklahoma and innovation and entrepreneurship and all sorts of reasons. But we're going backwards. And so the very claims of the Affordable Care Act is you'll get to keep your doctor, you get to keep your hospital, you'll save $2,500 a year, no problems, everything's going to be kumbaya. Guess what? 1 million people gained insurance if you don't count Medicaid, and 6.5 million lost it. Now, some of them have rebought insurance, but they lost what was working well for them and what was affordable for them. So I don't call it the Affordable Care Act. I call it the Unaffordable Care Act. Let's wait until they'll get to you in a minute, okay?
Senator, I want to thank you for bringing honor and integrity and information to us, which we sorely need in the midst of all too frequent corrupt and dysfunctional government. My question is, I read the Constitution, I study it, it seems like we have moved so far away from constitutional principles in so many areas that it's not even funny. But you serve time in the Congress, in the House, and that's where the spending originates, according to the Constitution, as I read it. Why is there not more assertive control of our budget from the House of Representatives when it comes to things like defunding the military? The president, as commander-in-chief, says he's going to reduce it. He does. His powers are very limited under the Constitution, as I read it, and Congress's powers are very large in that area. But whatever he seems to want, Congress just seems to go along with it. Is it, as a practical matter, is it possible that we can actually get some assertiveness in the House in controlling these expenditures more, since the Constitution gives them the sole authority for that?
Well, I think you need to look at a little broader picture. Spending bills have to start in the House, but they have to pass the Senate. And when you have a Senate that's dominated by people who don't think our deficit and debt are a real problem, who don't think that the fact that median family income has declined is a real problem, that think that government is an answer to every problem that we see or encounter in life, they have to pass that through the Senate. And so the Senate will pass a bill which will be far different than the House bill, and you have to fund. And we're going to have this battle where I'm not going to win it in the next 5 weeks before the end of September. We're going to fund the federal government. Now, a couple things. The House has passed the appropriation bills. The Senate hadn't passed a one. Why haven't the Senate passed a one? Because Harry Reid doesn't want to have any amendments on it. So we don't give him the right to pass the bill if he won't allow us an opportunity to fix the bill. So what will happen is we'll have a continuing resolution, which is a compromise between what the House wants and the proxy for the president, which is the Senate Democrats want, and we'll continue the funding of the federal government. But that's a disaster, because what that says is we don't want to cooperate and meet in the middle. What we want is our way or none. And so what the House has done routinely, they've been pretty good. They've been sending the appropriation bills, and they're pretty well in line with decreasing our deficit. But it has to get through the Senate, and it also has to get signed. And so we had a shutdown, which I thought was stupid, because there's no way. If I thought we could win a shutdown, ultimately get the president to come along, I'd be for it. But it's impossible for us to do that.
How long can we go, constitutionally speaking, on CR?
Well, you can go forever on continuing resolution, because what it is one great big appropriation bill. The problem is it's highly inefficient for all the agencies, because you're not changing the mandates that give them the flexibility for a changing pattern that they see in terms of what they're supposed to do. So it's a highly inefficient way, even though you're maybe cutting the dollars. What you're actually doing is making the dollars you spend go less far than you would before. So that's our problem. We don't have the leadership that says, I believe exactly the opposite of Tom Coburn, but I'm leading the Senate, and we're going to follow the Constitution. We're going to work the appropriation bills. We're going to come to a compromise, even if I don't get my way and Coburn doesn't get his way. We're going to get these bills through here, and we're going to do the right thing for the American people instead of the right thing for the politicians.
To your left, Dr. Coburn.
Paige, come down here next, please.
Okay.
It is hard to believe that the United States of America has come in a position where it is controlled by one man. With 2 more years to go, is there any possibility of stopping him now before he does any further damage?
Well, you know, the weakness I see in Washington is we put people with no real life experience into positions of power. And I'm not talking about the president right now. I'm talking about the Senate and the House. if you look, the House has really radically changed and moving away from that. We're seeing more and more new people who really have world experience, really have actually done something with their lives besides being elected to an office. But when 65 to 70% of the Senate has never had a job outside of being in an elected office, doesn't mean they're not great people. What it means is they come with a big deficit. They don't know what a lot of life is about because they haven't been in the troops. I happen to agree that a lot of the policies of this administration have been harmful to our long-term health as a nation, certainly harmful to our healthcare system, and certainly harmful to our ability to work in the world. But there's not anything we're going to be able to do. One of the things I'm going to do when I leave the country, trying to convince state legislatures to pass a convention of the states. And because one of the things I'm convinced of is Washington was never going to fix itself. And our founders, remember what the founders said in the enumerated powers? Said, here's the very specific powers for the federal government. Everything else is left to the states and the people. Well, the enumerated powers got gutted by Roosevelt's Supreme Court. And so now hardly a day comes by, can you interact anything that the federal government doesn't have its hand in? That was never the design. But Mason knew that all republics die. Actually, John Adams' quote on it, all republics die, they eventually murder themselves. And it's very true. So if we would like to restore the balance of power, number one, between the federal government and our state, and number two, the balance of power to bring the House and the Senate back up equal to the Supreme Court and the President, we're going to have to do it because they're never going to do it. And so for my children and grandchildren, I want them to taste the liberty and freedom that I had as a young man because a lot of it's gone. A lot of it's gone. Most often, the position of the federal government as they interact with us as citizens is, here's the rules. We think you did it wrong. Prove yourself innocent. We're not going to prove yourself guilty. In other words, it's totally opposite of our rule of law. And so what we've seen is tremendous costs be laid on our industry, our business, our social institutions, because all the burden of proof has been reversed, which is exactly the opposite of what our founders intended. So I believe that the way for us to solve these problems is with a constitutional convention. You did see that the House voted to start a lawsuit against a significant number of executive orders. The first time this has ever been tried with the authority of the House. It's been turned down when a majority leader of the Senate tried to do it themselves. So, and if you'll see on the recess appointments that the president did, the court sided with us. The court's going to side with us on all this, except no senator, no member of the House has standing before court because you have to prove personal injury to be able to get standing. And so hopefully one of the things we should be able to do is to say that the Senate can come before the court or the House can come before the court when the president's absolutely going against the intent of Congress and have relief before the court. I've never seen a Justice Department this poorly responsive to members of Congress. I think I have something like 20-some plus letters open to Eric Holder that I've never even heard an answer from in the last 18 months. No, they just don't care. They just don't answer our letters. And to me, that's lawlessness. All right. Okay.
Dr. Coburn, 2 years ago I read your book, The Debt Bomb, and the issues were presented as being very imminent and very dire. Can you please give us a live update on that? And if there's only one thing that we could change to address it, what would that be? What would be the most effective?
To change in regarding to the financial condition of the country?
Yes, sir.
Well, everything's been bought off by the Central European Bank. Draghi has delayed everything. And you're going to see Europe go through exactly what our central bank did. They've created all this false money, which has no velocity with it, which is why we're getting no growth. And when, in fact, they sterilize that increase in dollars, we're going to be suffering the consequence of that because they will not be able to sterilize it without significant inflation. If you go and look at the same philosophies occurring in Japan as we speak, Japan did all this tremendous buying of their own debt. In other words, creating money, buying of their own debt. Their economy is in contraction now. They also put a large tax on their people. It's not going to work. All they did was delay the time. And you're going to see the European Union, or at least the European Central Bank, do exactly what you saw our bank do. So all we're doing, everything's going to continue as it does till it doesn't. And there will be a point in time that either we have a catastrophe, or the other point I made in the book is the currency's not worth anything. And I want to tell you, governments use that. It's called financial repression. It's what they do is they use the devaluing of their currency to cover past sins at the expense of the people that they're supposedly governing. It's a very silent, painful, disproportionate, regressive tax. The millionaires in this country aren't going to get hurt by it, but everybody else is, and especially the poorest of our poor. When we don't have the money to program and we can't borrow the money, and we're printing the money from the Federal Reserve to pay for the money for Medicaid, guess what happens? Inflation goes like this. And we have a Federal Reserve today that says there's no inflation. They haven't bought any milk. They haven't paid any rents. They haven't bought any gasoline. They haven't bought a new car. They have no idea what the real impact of what price changes are to the middle income and lower middle income in our economy. The reason retail sales aren't springing is because wages haven't been increasing. Real wages haven't been increasing. And discretionary income hadn't been increasing. So we're not in, the stock market may be way up there, and we may be starting to see some signs of growth, but it eventually will bite us. And there are ways to modify that and mollify it, and that would be markedly decreased regulation that doesn't have any cost-benefit analysis to it. Reform the tax code so that we have a very simple tax code that people aren't gaming. By the way, one of the next reports I'm going to put out is a total look at the tax code. You'll be able to look at it. We look at every deduction, every business tax break, all the games that are played, and we ferret out what's true and what's not. The vast majority of them don't accomplish what we want to accomplish through the tax code. And we're going to make the case that you ought to sunset the tax code and start over with straight tax rates based on boom, 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 no deductions, no nothing. Just let's all pay our taxes and go on down the road. We'd save billions and billions of dollars. My friend, Mr. Shanahan, a CPA over here, doesn't really like that idea. All right, where are we?
To the right, back.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank you again for your service to our country. And being intimately involved with a number of your colleagues, do you have any people that you admire and respect that you see maybe in 2016, possible candidates, a short list?
Thanks for the question. I don't hardly ever answer that question because I really don't give it a lot of thought. And here's why. Whatever's going to happen in the 2016 presidential election, nobody out there has any idea who the candidates are going to be, who they're not going to be. And for me, it's wasted effort. I really think that one of the critical elections is how do we take the Senate and combine it with the House and start giving the president bills to either sign or veto, to where we actually control it, to where we actually restore the Senate's role in advice and consent on nominees, which has been totally taken away by the majority. There are great people that I know. Ron Johnson's a wonderful senator, had a business, came there has done a lot of stuff. I'm not touting him for president. I'm just saying there are great. Angus King, former governor of Maine, independent, good thinker, doesn't care if he gets reelected, is thinking about how do you solve these problems. I mean, a real stellar individual who is there not to play politics, but to get problems solved. So there are multiple people in the Senate. And all you hear about the Senate, the Senate actually gets, I have dinner with a Democrat or two at least once a week. I mean, this isn't, and so do other Republicans. The story that's been told is a Harry Reid fib. The problem is not the members of the Senate. So we'll decide as a country how we do that and how we go about that. But whoever's up there on the Las Vegas line now is going to change 3 or 4 times in the next year. And so I just refuse to spend any time worrying about it.
Dr. Coburn, very back row in the middle, all the way to the top.
Okay, gotcha. Way back there. You're a Baptist.
No, I'm an OSU Aggie.
Okay. That means you didn't want to get manure on the carpet and you stayed back there, right?
You bet. We all here believe in democracy, and we recognize it's based upon the law of the land. And the part of democracy is crime and punishment. I recognize the crime, but where in the world has happened to punishment? I sit here and look at the idea that in Colorado, the debacle where the guy went into the theater and killed all those people, or the Boston Marathon to death. 15 or 20 years after the event has occurred, do we get around to enforcing it? And in my opinion, without enforcing the punishment, our country is going in the wrong direction. What can we do about it?
Well, I think the first thing we can do is set an example here in Oklahoma where we don't allow that to happen. With our state court system. The games that are played in the legal system today, delays and continuances and reasons for not doing it. But, I agree with you, that's a problem. That isn't a new problem for us. That's an old problem. That's been going on 30 or 40 years. But your point is well taken. Tying punishment to an act and doing it in a timely way, which is part of the words of the Constitution, is very important for us as we try to solve the problems. But I would tell you, right now, the best thing we could do is make sure Oklahoma courts are efficient, that we have them staffed appropriately, and we don't allow the lawyers to play games, so that people are brought to justice in a timely manner, and whatever punishment is there, if they're found guilty, is meted out quickly. And we can set an example. I love the fact that Texas is on our southern border. There's a lot of great examples they're showing America today, what they're doing. I want us to do the same thing. Where are we?
Right here.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Coburn, for all the work that you've done. Seeing how far President Obama seems to have, or not be following the Constitution and the deficit that our country's in, it makes me think about our younger generations. After 2016, when President Obama is now out of office, what sort of problems or, things may come along to, our younger generations right now and will really hurt the country?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, the fact is, in his first 6 years, we've had almost $4.5 trillion worth of new debt that you're going to get to pay off. And by the time he finishes, it'll be 8 to 9 trillion. Remember, the projections right now, because we forced sequestration, we've got a little lull right now in the growth. The deficit this year will be somewhere between 400 and 600 billion. But in 2 years from now, it's expected to be 1.2 trillion again. So and the poignancy of her question is, and I've worked on all the time I've been there, what does it say about us that we would transfer our luxury and the expense of it onto our children's back to steal their future? That's what it's a moral question. It's not a question of philosophy. It is a moral question. Is it okay to steal future from your children? And if it is, then America's already lost. We're already lost. But if it isn't, then we need leaders to stand up and call us to the sacrifice that's going to be necessary for all of us to solve the problems that are in front of us.
Left, back.
Good evening, Senator. My question's regarding the new markets tax credits. I read your report this week, and I've been reading some of the responses. So my question's kind of two-part. The first part is, can you elaborate some more on what you think the benefits will be of letting it expire? And then secondly, I've been reading some of the responses saying that it's been successful at job creation, and I was just wondering if that was accurate.
Well, I don't. The new markets tax credit is was designed. I think it's first started in 1993, or I can't remember the exact year. The whole idea behind it was to take and give extra tax credit to investments in our low economic areas, so that we would create economic growth, increase job creation, and increase material well-being in those poor areas. And the idea behind it's fine, except 96%, what you're reading is the 4% where it worked. The 96% is where it didn't. But what we essentially did through fees and rates was give $1 billion a year to 4 big banks. That's what we did. That's what we're doing. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some good that's come out of it. You know, I'm not much of a singer, but 1 out of 10 notes I can hit. The point is you know, you can throw some spaghetti on the wall and some of it's going to stick. But the point is do we really want to give U.S. Bank and J.P. Morgan more money for, and here's where they've invested it, in areas that aren't poor. There is not one census area in the country that won't qualify for the new markets tax credit. Well, you know, I tell you, there's a lot of areas of Tulsa that shouldn't get a tax break. They're doing pretty good. There are some areas in Tulsa that should get a tax break if we're going to use that program, but they're not the ones that got it. So, again, well-intentioned, good idea, how do we help the least among us? But the middlemen got all the money. And the least among us didn't get helped most of the time. But the people that did get help were the well-heeled and well-connected. I think we ought to let it die and then figure out. Here's the other thing. Is it the federal government's responsibility to take your tax dollars and create a program so that Oklahoma can have federal tax dollars to try to help people? Or is it Oklahoma's problem? Yeah, it's called federalism. That's what we were founded on. And the whole presumption behind the new market tax credit goes against what the Constitution says is the role of the federal government. And now I know, look, the knives are out on me on the new markets tax credit. Every paid lobbyist that works for any of those big banks is getting somebody to write something somewhere. But the fact is truth has this wonderful capability of being able to still be seen in terms of all the smoke. And I bet its life is limited. Yeah, I guarantee you, while I'm in the Senate, they're going to have to spend the time to get that past me. It'll never get reauthorized.
Dr. Coburn, to your right, towards the back.
Gotcha.
Regarding the state constitutional convention that you're working on, if you get out there, number one, what do you think would be the best amendment to bring forth, and what would be the easiest? That's two questions.
Well, I think the easiest would be a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That's the easiest. Number two, which I think would also be easy, is term limits on members of Congress. It's an 84% issue. And number three is the right of the Congress to have a veto power on regulatory costs in this country that are more than $100 million a year. What that does is that's saying we're going to pull back and maintain our authority that if you issue regulations that are not in the intent of what we passed with Congress, and the cost-benefit analysis shows that it lays $100 million on the economy, we get the right to say yes or no. And what that does, that puts a check on the bureaucracy. I mean, if you look at the EPA today, all these communities, smaller communities in Oklahoma are getting killed by the EPA. Because every time they can figure out a way to test for something to a lower level, they change the clean water standards. And what happens is we have to build new water plants. Well, we've got 20 or 30 years left in the ones we got. But because we can go lower, not based on science. Most of what is out there isn't based on science. It's based on the ability to test and measure better. So I think we're going to be able to do, I don't know if this will happen in my lifetime, but the one way to save our country that I know is to have a constitutional convention and exert our rights as citizens and states against this behemoth called the federal government.
Left side. You see, left side. Keep looking to the side. Back.
Okay, gotcha. I can't see. The lights are in my eyes. That's why I'm having
Well, I'm kind of in the dark, so that doesn't help. I've been listening to you talk about kind of working, the Senate working as a team and compromise. I have a question about a specific act. At the end of the Senate session, the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act was up for unanimous consent. It had already passed by the House by unanimous consent. And currently you're the only senator who's put a hold on that bill. And it directly impacts Oklahoma in several different ways. But my question to you then would be, when you go back in September, are you planning to withdraw your hold and let it pass by unanimous consent? Or are you going to maintain your hold and hold at the passage of that act until probably past your term, or if it ever does?
Well, I thank you for that question, because it gives me an opportunity to explain a lot of what works in the Senate. Before the Senate came home in the last week, they sent a bill to your kids at $26 billion. That's the bills they passed that weren't paid for. I'm not against this bill. I'm against not paying for it. If you're going to grow the amount of money, then cut somewhere else in the federal government. And I do that I hold more bills than everybody combined. I write a letter, and you can get a copy of that letter of why I'm holding that bill. When does it stop? What cause isn't good enough to make the cause that this young lady just made? Sure, they're good causes. I got hammered. Harry Reid and his buddies, Patty Murray, wanted to pass another veterans job program. We're spending $4 to $5 billion a year now on veterans job programs. We have 4 of them. None of them have a metric. And when they've been studied, none of them are effective. So comes to the floor another veterans job bill, $1 billion a year for another one. And I was the only one that would stand up and say, this isn't going to happen. You tell me what's not working in the other bills and fix that before we create another one that's not going to work just like the 4 that we have. So this is a small principle. I don't know exactly how much money it was. It wasn't a great amount of money. But the fact is they're reauthorizing for a long time. Everything I want sunsetted. I want it to have to come and Congress have to decide again whether we should do it. And number 2 is if you want something to pass my desk, and remember what unanimous consent is. It means nobody votes on it. Nobody's held accountable. Only the person who disagrees gets ferreted out. I'm proud to get ferreted out on hundreds of bills every day that don't meet what we need to do.
Dr. Coburn, towards the back in the middle.
Okay.
Senator Coburn, do you really read all the emails that come into you?
If they're similar, no. We're 4,000. We were 10,000 behind. We're now down to 4,000. The vast majority of them I read because I want the answer to be my answer, not a staff person's answer. And so if you get an email back from me, most often the question you ask, you got answered. You may not agree with it, but you got an answer. Versus how most other people operate is they say, thank you for your input, I'll consider your viewpoints, thank you very much.
Here's my real question. I'm going to take you in a different area. I don't think anybody's covered it. This is the U.S. postal system. A service that is provided for in the Constitution, which is under tremendous attack. I'm not a member of the Postal Service, so I'm just telling you that to begin with. Your committee is on record of making several recommendations to change how the Postal Service does its business. This last week, we heard they lost another $2 billion in the quarter. Revenue went up 2%, expenses went up 8%. Salaries, benefits, and disability are things that are causing this dynamic rise. How do they get a hold on this with this unionized workforce?
Well, you all will be interested to know in the federal code for the Postal Regulatory Commission, when the Postal Service and the unions go to arbitration, it is a law that they cannot consider the financial health of the post office as they do that arbitration. Look, Postal Service has hundreds of thousands of great employees. I really appreciate getting my mail. You know, I like to do the Sudoku at night. You know, I want that paper there. I don't really appreciate it when I get my credit card bill, but it's, you know, nevertheless. Here's the problem that I'm fighting. I'm fighting the mailers, the magazines, the flats, and everything else who are subsidized by you to the tune of $1.5 billion a year. In other words, they underpay what it actually costs to deliver their product. And then the employees who, on average, aren't paid as high as most federal workers, but are still paid about double what the average Oklahoman makes. And my question to them is, look, you're losing money. There's two ways to fix it. You have to either increase revenues or cut expenses. And you have this big lobby of the mailers who don't want the revenues to be increased. And you have the powerful union, which Terry Reid's already said bowed down to, is we're not going to let our bill come to the floor. Our bill would, in fact, make the post office healthy over the next 10 years. They'd end up with about $5 billion in cash, paid off most of their debt. They owe the federal government $8 billion right now. They cannot borrow any more money legally. So what has to happen is the post office is going to have to get sicker before it gets better, until the politicians will allow us to really fix it. You can only do two things. You either have to increase revenues or cut expenses. There's no other option. And what I tell them every time, whatever your idea is fine with me, but here's how much got to be cut, or here's how much revenue has to be increased. And we can't go there. And so it is a constitutionally provided service that will continue, but it's going to have to continue in a different way.
Right here, Dr. Coburn.
Thank you for being here. When we take over the Senate and get rid of the Reid problem next term, what I would like to see done is I'd like to see a 5-year period that there's no foreign aid to any country except Israel. That's my first question. The second question, which is associated with it. Right now, one phone call from President Obama to the President of Mexico would get our Marine fellow who made a turn at the border, who's been in prison over 6 months and some torture possibly. He could make one phone call and that'd be eliminated. He could come back home. Is there anything, if he won't do it, that the Congress could do to force that to happen?
Well, first of all, I don't know that your statement's accurate. I'm not sure with one phone call this president could get them to act on it. I'm just saying credibility is important. Consistency and accountability is important. I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. I think what's happening to him is atrocious. I don't think we've seen the kind of activity, but we don't know because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It may have been he made the phone call and he was told to take a flying leap. You know, we don't know that. Well, you can threaten him, but we have international treaties that he would have to violate. So the question is have they violated any UN treaty or any bilateral agreement we have with Mexico? And the answer I've gotten on that is right now they haven't. They're giving him due process. It's just really slow. It's an unfortunate incident that is going to rile people up on this side, and if they were smart in Mexico, they'd say, we really don't want the Americans any more riled. All right? The first part of your question was? Well, okay. Look, I'm not a big fan of foreign aid. The first foreign aid I'd cut is money to the United Nations because we get nothing from them. That's not to say we don't need a international body with which to conduct foreign policy and have legitimacy, but of the over $7 billion we're sending every year to the United Nations, half of it goes to UN peacekeeping, of which we have documented half of it is defrauded. All right? So just remember, a fourth of Oklahoma's budget is defrauded by the UN every year. All the entire budget of the state of Oklahoma. The other half, we get no transparency on how the money's spent. So, you know, it's the worst of bureaucracy. It's worse than the federal bureaucracy, which is, you know, is worse than Oklahoma's bureaucracy, but it's the worst of bureaucracies. So, look, we should use foreign aid where it helps our purpose to keep us safe. We've had a lot of stupidity with it. I mean, the fact that China gets foreign aid from us and owns $4.5 trillion worth of our debt, it's not real smart. But you need to have a leadership that will address that. And we have a State Department that is very resistant and has totally been infiltrated by a policy mindset that says we can solve everybody in the world's problems, and we can't. And we especially can't if we're sick ourselves. And so what we have to do is get healthy ourselves. And I said as I started this meeting, the way we get healthy ourselves is great leadership that brings America together rather than poor leadership that uses the divisions within our country to advantage themselves.
In the back to the left, Dr. Coburn.
Good evening, Dr. Coburn. Thank you for your conservative service, this opportunity to access you, and additionally for your time and efforts, as well as your staff, dedicated to identifying, highlighting, and fighting government waste, and for your waste books. With the federal government that has created and facilitated a massively overgrown entitlement system to the point where, as a byproduct, we can't even trust the unemployment reports, what, in your opinion, can and must be done to reduce its size, incentivize Americans to working again, and to prevent honest taxpayers from footing the bill for a lot of Americans and non-Americans from unfairly receiving government subsidies? Thank you.
That was a big question in there. Well, look, the way you solve our problems is follow the Constitution, which isn't being followed today. Yeah, I'm a real believer in the enumerated powers. I'm ready to devolve all the things that the federal government has usurped from the state of Oklahoma back here. I think we can do it better. I think we will be held more accountable. The way to do it is, again, through leadership. Identifying what's the real problem in our country. What's the lethargy? What's the malaise? The real problem is lack of confidence. The lack of confidence comes from what? The undermining of the rule of law. No accountability. When are you running for the Senate? No accountability. The fact is we're all frustrated. And we'd like to see it change. But that isn't going to change until you have leadership that calls for that change. But that change is going to have to be accompanied by sacrifice. We're all going to have to sacrifice. We're all going to have to give up something if, in fact, we want our country back. And that may be less convenience. That may be, in Oklahoma, may be the opposite of the way we're going in terms of higher taxes if, in fact, we're going to have more responsibility. But let me tell you the key I see. The key I see is in a book that I read 19 years ago after I got this very nasty letter from a DHS social worker in Oklahoma telling me that I didn't care about poor people I didn't care a thing. And I had read this book before. I reread it. It's called The Tragedy of American Compassion. It's written by a guy by the name of, I'll think of it in a minute. But anyhow, it's the Tragedy of American Compassion. It's a history of how America used to help those that needed our help. It had accountability in it. It had enough help to help you and help yourself. But it didn't create dependency. It created transparency. It created personal interest. The reason I interject, Marvin Olasky is the author. The reason I interject that is we shouldn't need the federal government to help people in the state of Oklahoma. We should be doing it. I mean, if you reflect on your faith for a minute. What are you called to? We've decided we'd let the government do what we're supposed to be doing. And if in fact we lived out our faith, there would be no need for a federal government program that usurps state powers, because we would be modeling freedom at its greatest, where you're given of yourself freely to help somebody else in need. When you're doing that, you're holding them accountable. Looking them in the eye and helping them is a whole lot different than getting a debit card refilled every month. Big difference, big changes. So, our relaxation in terms of what our obligation is to our fellow man, of loving our neighbor, created a void that the federal government filled up. And the way to solve that is let's take it back, one person at a time. We can do it. But we're not going to do it unless we're called to do it. Our problems are, the inefficiency of the federal government is mind-boggling. You think you know? You have no idea. I can take $100 billion out of the Pentagon tomorrow and nobody would miss it, except the people that were sitting in the stools figuring out how to waste it. That's $100 billion. I could take another $200 or $300 billion out of the rest of the agencies and nobody would miss it. It's worse than your worst imagination in terms of the inefficiency and lack of accountability and transparency. That's why I write all the reports. I want you to know what's going on. All right.
Dr. Coburn, we have time for about two more questions. We're in the back of the auditorium to your right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Two more questions.
Hello. The Republican Party is typically seen as being supporter of big business and not necessarily supporter of free markets and small business. Is there a sentiment in Congress now among Republicans to shift to maybe ending corporate welfare, getting away from support for big business and supporting free markets instead? Maybe killing the IM Export Bank might be a good start?
Well, there's a lot of generalizations in what you said. I'm not sure Republicans would necessarily agree with you. There's no question that big business benefits when it can get an advantage through government, and they work hard to do that. I think Republicans have a blind eye when it comes to the well-heeled and well-connected in terms of the large business community. Just like I think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have a blind eye when it comes to social welfare programs that are highly inefficient and highly ineffective. That said, I think the fact that we classify groups, I mean, how many times have I said things about big business today? I obviously don't fall in that category. At least if I were out campaigning today, it would markedly diminish the money that I could get from that group of people. I think Republicans are what you want them to be. You need to hold them accountable. I mean, there's all sorts of Republicans in the state of Oklahoma. I'm still trying to figure out how Republicans control every office and the state legislature, and they're still growing the government in Oklahoma. I haven't figured that out yet, but I will. I don't know that I can give you an answer that crosses generalized lines. I think we ought to, I've already said, I think we ought to sunset the tax code so that nobody benefits more than anybody else. And we shouldn't use the tax code to try to engineer social programs in our country. I think we ought to use the tax code to collect the revenue to defend the country and do the things under the enumerated powers that are left and only for control of the federal government. Everything else ought to be taxed at the state and local level. And I think we'd solve a lot of problems.
Middle back. Dr. Coburn, this final question.
Have you heard of the Liberty Tour, Reclaiming America, and or sometimes called the Black Robe Regiment? And if so, what is your opinion?
No, I have not.
You want another question?
Dr. Coburn, we have over here to your right, down towards the front. Excuse me. I'm going to get this lady over here.
Thank you for your service, Dr. Coburn. It's too bad they haven't cloned you 535 times.
I don't believe in cloning no matter what the benefit is.
You pointed out earlier that you have enlightened us about the waste and fraud in government. How can we contact other representatives in Congress other than our own? We don't need to talk to you, and have them answer and listen to us.
Well, I think, look, everybody here knows somebody that doesn't live in Oklahoma, right? Somebody, we have family, we have friends, we have acquaintances. If you're really concerned about our country, knowledge is power. You know, a lot of our associations don't have the knowledge that we have about what's going on in Washington. It's okay to be a pest with your friends, to let them know that you feel strongly about reining in the federal government and here's the waste, and have them contact their representatives. But until we stop the gerrymandering where members of Congress pick their citizens instead of citizens pick their members of Congress, until we put term limits on, because incumbency is a very hard thing to overcome. It's a very hard thing to overcome. Until we do some things like that, we're not going to solve the problem. But we can start moving towards a solution with some of the things I outlined tonight. Us being responsible for our neighbor. Us communicating what we know to our friends and neighbors. Us not taking no for an answer on the principles that we know are right. Calling for a constitutional convention that will right the ship and rebalance it. Those are all possible things, but it requires us. And you know, you don't have to 100% agree. You just have to want to move us out of where we are today. Again, I'll say it's been an absolute privilege to have the honor to represent the quality of people of Oklahoma. I thank you for the support through the years. I am really looking forward to not getting on an airplane every Monday morning. I'm up to 4 million miles on American Airlines. It has been my honor. I thank you. I thank you for the privilege you've given to me. I hope all of you have a great night. I hope God blesses each of you. Thank you.